Hey everybody, today I have come out to Montana to drive the new 2024 AT4X and the AT4X AEV edition. This is the most capable half-ton off-road pickup truck. As long as you're not talking about Baja-style racing, that would be where the Raptor and the TRX are playing. GMC is going in a very different direction with their AT4X, or as I like to call it, the AT4X. AT4X is clearly the flagship off-road trim of the Sierra 1500, and it has a flagship price tag to match starting just under $80,000. That is, however, less expensive than the flagship pricing that we see in the TRX or in the Raptor R from Ram and from Ford for a few different reasons. The first one, of course, is no supercharged V8 under there. You'll hear we have a 3-liter inline 6, which sounds, I have to say, fantastic. But the other reason this is not quite as expensive is it has a different mission. When designing the AT4X, GMC decided not to give up as much on-road capability, towing capability, and hauling capability as we find in those other flagship off-road trucks. So this is a bit more of a Swiss Army knife kind of off-road vehicle. We have the extra locker up front for better rock crawling performance. We have a big heavy-duty steel bumper up front in this sort of matte painted finish here. If you get the AEV edition of your AT4X, then we get a different rear bumper. We'll take a look at that in just a moment. But cool touch, we have the capability for a winch right from the factory. Now you won't get the winch from the factory. We will have that license plate cover there, but you can easily swap in the winch of your choice aftermarket. Let me know what you think of the design of the AT4X. I think it strikes the right balance of classy and off-roady, I guess, for lack of a better term. We find the full LED headlights up here with the LED turn signals, fog lights below, and certainly less of a controversial design than we find in the Chevy Silverado. And that design, for me at least, is one logical reason to get the GMC over the Chevy, although you will find relatively similar capability in that Chevy. So for me, a lot of this comes down to personal flavor and personal taste. Do you like the look of this, or do you like the look of the Chevy a bit more? I'll let you decide whether you want to call this a trim level or a different model, but I would argue that there is a little bit less of a change from a regular Sierra 1500 to the AT4X structurally for the vehicle. Clearly we get a lot of upgrades, like we get extra skid plates all the way around, and if you get the AEV edition, you get even more skid plates. We get unique wheels, we get upgraded tires that are more all-terrain focused, obviously, and we get a very important 2-inch suspension lift all the way around. This one has the rocker rails also on it. You could definitely notice those there from the side. But if you want to make further tweaks to this vehicle, it may be a little bit less expensive to modify because the suspension and the mounting points, etc., are more consistent with the regular Sierra 1500 than we find in the TRX or in the Raptor R. The Raptor R definitely has a lot of commonality with the regular F-150, but there were some important changes. We also find body changes on those vehicles, and this does not have that particular addition. So it means it's going to be easier to park because this is not as wide. You notice we don't have crazy fender flares out here. We don't find crazy fender flares up front. Obviously, that's something you could add yourself aftermarket, but it makes this a little bit less flashy, a little bit more under the radar, if that's something that you're after. And again, a little bit easier to modify aftermarket because, you know, the panels are all the same. And if you are planning on using one of these as a work and play truck, when it gets damaged, it's going to be a little bit less expensive to fix. Out back, we don't find as much of a change as we found up front. That's because this is not the AT4X with the AEV edition package, and as a result, we have the regular bumper in the back. I think that's a little bit discordant because this is a black painted shiny bumper, ostensibly behind the dust, of course, whereas up front we have that metal matte bumper. I wish they were both either standard or both optional so that way they matched. That's certainly something you'll notice as you walk around the truck. On the other hand, back here, GMC has given us what I think is quite simply the best tailgate in the industry. This is the Multi-Pro tailgate. You can also, of course, get it in the Chevy under a slightly different name. I find this significantly more useful than the new barn door tailgate that we find in the F-150 or the similar barn door tailgate that we find in the Ram 1500 for a few reasons. First, it obviously gives you a big step into the back. That's really handy. It also helps you retain items in the back if you want to put some of those longer items in the truck. Bear in mind, this is not an 8-foot bed, but you could put those 8-foot items in here with this as a backstop, and it gives you a little bit of extra practicality. Again, if you're using this as a work truck, you can also use this, I guess, as a party tailgate surface, etc. You can get a built-in speaker, Lots of handy practical touches there, but it doesn't get a forklift any closer to the inside like you would get in Ram's barn door design. While we're talking about cargo practicality, I also like the fact that you can get a composite bed in the AT4X. And you can combine that composite bed, obviously, with a steel box. So if you're not a fan of the aluminum sheet metal that we find in the F-150, if you're more of a steel traditionalist, we have that here. But then you would have the advantage of a non-corrosive carbon fiber bed. It is optional. Rather unfortunately, this truck does not have it, and I still have not been able to get one of those models at home to borrow. Apparently, production is still extremely limited, so if you do want that option box, check with your dealer, make sure you can actually get it on your truck, but it is pretty cool. As I said at the beginning of the video, the engine lineup in the AT4X is very different from the Ram or the Ford. And I'm not just talking about the Raptor R and the TRX, I'm talking about this base engine. There's nothing like it available in the Ram or Ford lineup. This is a 3-liter inline-6 turbo diesel. It's been pretty popular for GM generally, and now they've given us a second generation of the engine. This produces now over 300 horsepower and nearly 500 pound-feet of torque. This is really the torque king outside those supercharged V8s. Now, if you don't want this engine, and I really don't know why you wouldn't, you can get the 6.2-liter V8 in the AT4X. That's going to give you 420 horsepower, 460 pound-feet of torque. So really, it's just going to get you 0 to 60 a little bit faster, but it's not going to give you better payload or really better towing performance than we find out of this 3-liter inline-6 turbo diesel. This one also sounds pretty darn cool. If you haven't already made this connection, the massive low-end torque is not just advantageous for towing, it's also advantageous for off-roading. And GM really makes the most of it because they also give this a front locker, a pretty unique feature in a half-ton truck. You won't find that in something like the TRD Pro from Toyota. You don't just have the locker in the rear, you don't just have the 2-speed transfer case and the 500 pound-feet of torque essentially, you also have a front locker. Since I've already covered the interior refresh in this generation Sierra, let's just take a really brief look around the inside. You can see we have a multi-way power driver's seat over here with massage functionality, adjustable bolsters, and 4-way adjustable lumbar support. And then we get, of course, unique upholstery in the AT4X model. So we get the piping around the seat, the AT4X logo right there. On the door panels, we get baseball glove-like stitching, different textures to the soft touch materials, and wood trim above that. When this generation Sierra launched, I wasn't the biggest fan of its interior design, but GMC recently made a pretty major overhaul to this interior, and I think it's gone from nearly last in the segment to segment best. I think this does beat out the Ram 1500 when it comes to both interior design and in terms of functionality for the infotainment system as well. Up here at the top of the dashboard, we have stitched materials, which really dresses things up, and the same sort of piping that we find on the seat backs. That really helps carry the theme over. There are a lot of different materials in here, but I think GMC has done a really good job blending them all together. So above these slim air vents, you can see we have this little shiny insert there. We then have a brushed metal trim panel there, not the wood that we find on the doors. Then we have this big LCD infotainment system running the latest Google connected software. You can see we actually have the Google mapping interface right over there. You can get the full screen map right there from Google. But the biggest thing for me with this system are the camera views. We get an absolute ton of them, including invisible trailer views, lots of side views, hitch views, etc. Not all those are standard on the Sierra, but I would definitely say if you're doing any kind of towing or hauling, get all the camera views. It's a really great touch. Not so great is the amount of shiny black plastic we have around everything. That is definitely going to get scratched up out in the country a little bit more than I would like, and you will certainly notice that around the climate controls down here. A lot of shiny black plastic. Big start-stop button for the engine there, and nice big chunky toggles for all these various features, including the front and rear lockers over here on this side. You'll notice this vehicle also has heated and ventilated front seats. Nice touch there. Moving over to the passenger side, we find the 2 glove box arrangement we see in other Sierra and Silverado models. So smaller one up top and then a larger glove box below. This would just barely fit an 11 or 10-inch tablet computer. Down on the floor, we find one of 2 different mats available. This is the regular AT4X mat. If you get the AEV edition, you get unique all-weather floor mats. You see we have really big bottle holders down there. Lots of attention to detail as far as storing stuff, and you'll really notice that here in the center console as well. We have 2 big bottle holders here, a big area where you can just toss all that kind of whatever is with you, keys, etc. Another smaller little storage area there. We find a joystick-style shifter here, although I kind of wish they'd moved this to the column and just given us more storage in the middle. I do sort of like the trailer brake controller being here, here, but I am a little bit worried about drinks maybe spilling on that. Now, since everybody loves to put lots of stuff right there, and that's where a lot of folks put their charging mat, GMC has actually thought about that, and they tuck it away right there in its own little slot, and that slot is cooled to help keep the phone cool. Inside this area, we have 2 USB inputs, 120 volt power inverter outlet, and of course the hanging file storage area with a really big wide top right on there. And then we find a big cup holder behind. That's where you can put lenses, big drinks, things like that. Lots and lots of storage going on in here. And then we find their excellent instrument cluster software over here. This is a very configurable LCD instrument cluster. There are a few different themes that you can choose from. I'll let you explore that on your own, or you can check out some of our other videos where I take a deeper dive into that. Moving out from there, we have the typical 4-spoke steering wheel that we see in other GMC models, metal trim down there, shift paddles. These are kind of the partial small baby paddle because on the back of the steering wheel, you notice we have volume up, down, and track forward, backward buttons. Over here on this side of the steering wheel, we find the buttons that control that multifunction LCD cluster, and then over here we have the controls for the adaptive cruise control. To the left of the driver, we find even more buttons. This is where we find the controls for the 4-wheel drive system, including a 4-auto mode. That is something that I really appreciate, something we don't find in the Tundra, for instance. Headlight controls, and then controls for the lights around the vehicle. Then up here, we have the controls for the full color heads-up display. In the back, I've decided not to move the luggage to give you a realistic picture of what it's like to travel in an AT4X if you're going to be doing off-roading and you don't want your stuff to get dirty back there in the bed. So we have lots of luggage right here in the middle because Travis and I have been out here today filming the AT4X, and the rear seats fold up in this manner, which I really like because that gives you all of this storage area there under the floor. As far as cab space goes, logically we have a really big cab, just as you'd expect. You have this dish out up here for rear seat headroom. It does mean that if you're taller, you will fit back here, but you're really going to be looking at this approximately 3-inch or so divot right there in the ceiling. And that's because we have that powered sunroof up front. Now, in a off-road truck, I do find this headliner choice a little bit surprising. This is actually a faux suede headliner, although thankfully it's black, so it's not going to show those marks from things being tossed in here quite as well as a light headliner would. All right, it's time to get this new diesel out on the road. I will say that unless this is back-to-back with the previous generation diesel, you're probably not going to notice the horsepower difference.
No, it's not enormous. It's about a 10% increase in horsepower, about 7% in torque. So I think a worthwhile upgrade, but not gonna blow your mind if you're going back-to-back.
Right, and the 0 to 60 time is probably not going to blow your mind either.
Right.
Bearing in mind that there are 2 of us in here, it's about 80 degrees outside, and we're at about 4,500 feet of elevation. It took this truck exactly 9.4 seconds to go 0 to 60, so not overly speedy. I would expect that to get 3 to 4 tenths of a second faster when we do this at home, at sea level, at 60 degrees, like our usual test cycle is done at. So expect somewhere around there. Mind you, the turbocharger obviously is going to benefit people that live at higher elevation because you're going to get that torque, you're going to get that horsepower. It can compensate a little bit for the altitude. But it's not a speed demon truck.
No, and it's never been designed to, diesel has never been about top speed, right? It's been about the torque when you need it, and they're a workhorse, and in this application, its intention really is to provide the oomph that a truck owner would need, and that's not generally top speed.
Now, of course, GM has done a reasonable amount of work to try and raise the red line and give this a bit more power. Obviously, it's still going to shift just short of 4,000 RPM to make the most out of the engine. But that's where I would say the 10-speed automatic really comes into its own here because there are so many gear ratios available between the tallest highway ratio and the first gear ratio that it has a gear practically for everything. If I'm cruising along at 55, say I needed to pass someone, I could floor it, I could get reasonable power. If I slowed down here to say maybe about 30 miles an hour, say you're towing a trailer and you floor it, there's a gear ratio for that, for you to have a reasonable amount of passing power. I think it fits the personality too.
It does. Now with the AT4X model, the standard engine is this diesel. And so I think if you're going to make this the standard engine, it has to do a lot of things really well. And while they've made refinements to the engine, I think pairing it with a good automatic transmission where you can take advantage of the somewhat limited power band, but when you don't feel like it's limited, that's the best of all worlds.
Yeah, and it really fits the off-roading and the towing and hauling combined mission of this vehicle. GM didn't want you to give up as much towing and hauling as maybe you find in some competitive off-road trims, and And the extra torque really does make sense off-road too, because if you're climbing hills, you don't necessarily need to put it in 4-low quite as often. Of course, 4-low is there if you really want all that stump pulling torque, because you get the advantage of that 2-speed transfer case. Definitely a great touch. I also really like the fact that this is one of the few 4-wheel drive systems available in the truck segment that has an auto mode. This is becoming more popular. We're finding it in the American trucks, at least available, but it's something that Toyota still refuses to do in their pickup trucks by and large.
Well, and you see that there are some discrepancies between these Toyota vehicles and some of the other competitors, and they build trucks, but they build a bit of a different brand of truck. And so I think if that is one of those features you're looking for, Toyota may not have made it on your list to begin with.
Yeah, but I would argue that, it's definitely going to be on someone's shopping list if they're considering this AT4X, because of course we have the TRD Pro, we have the new TRD Pro from Tundra. We also, if you're looking for something a little bit smaller, we're going to talk about the Canyon in a different video, so stay tuned for that. But there is going to be a, obviously, very off-road focused version of the new Tacoma.
Yeah, and we'll see that hopefully sooner than later. We'll be able to take a look at it. And I think it's going to be a challenge when you pick a focus. And if that Tacoma is going to be very focused on being an off-road Tacoma, then obviously there are going to be some drawbacks in the other categories that you'll find for truck uses. And I think in this particular vehicle, they've really tried to find a good balance, and I think they have.
Yeah, for sure. And then out on this gravel road, some good opportunity to talk about this, you'll certainly notice that the ride quality is still a little bit firmer than some true off-road enthusiasts might like. So this is still something you might want to swap out on your own afterwards if you're really doing this kind of duty regularly. And there's a reason for that, because with this, GMC didn't want to limit the payload and towing capability, which is something that you generally find in very off-road focused trims. The springs have to get soft, payload goes down, therefore towing goes down. And this, they really wanted to maintain that high payload and high towing ability. So if you're spending hours and hours on this kind of road surface, say out here in Montana where we are, you might want to think of something just a little softer.
I will say that I think this is pretty well balanced. I think it's managing these bumps pretty well. And I would say that the vehicle that we're in right now is very capable of lots of things, and it's capable of handling this road and doing it fairly well. If this is what you find yourself driving on a regular basis, that's when you might need to get more specialized.
Yeah. Of course, if you want to do lots of serious off-roading as well, you might just want to think about the kind of off-roading you're doing. This is going to be a little bit better for certain kinds of off-roading than others. High-speed Baja-style off-road, I'm not sure I would want to do it in this exact vehicle, but this is really the sort of the Swiss Army knife of off-road trucks. It's designed to be able to do sand, rocks, dirt roads like this, rougher trails. It's designed to do kind of everything right out of the box. But if you wanted to, hone it a little bit and get specific, then obviously you can do that yourself.
Yeah, and like I said, we might see that when we look at something like the Tacoma. Now again, that's a different level of truck, even like the Jeep Gladiator. But there are trade-offs, and we're sitting in a nice cabin, and we're handling these conditions with a good engine. There's a lot going on here that's really positive.
Yeah, I'm looking back, I'm not really noticing too much bed wiggle. So, that was a common complaint with older pickup trucks in off-road situations. Even rougher roads like this is that, the bed really starts to wobble on its own. And this is really staying together pretty nicely. It's really coming through these bends well, and pretty composed for, a pretty darn big and heavy truck.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's very little that it can't do, and the question is, what do you need it to do?
It's a little bit difficult to talk about fuel economy, of course, but it has been pretty darn good in this truck over the last 160 miles, which includes more than just us driving. That also includes idling time, other people driving on-road, off-road, filming, etc. 20 mpg is actually very good for a half-ton truck. If you treat this gently, you can get up into the 30s out on the open highway. And there are two benefits to that, obviously. You're going to maybe save money. It's going to depend on the price of diesel. Maybe. It's a tough one. But you are definitely going to have fantastic range when you're off-roading or when you're towing or hauling.
Yeah, it's the same size fuel tank for the gasoline versus the diesel models and across the line. And so if you've got that diesel, you're just going to get that much farther with the tank of gas you have. And I think the other option is, if you're more focused on fuel economy, normally that means dropping into a smaller displacement turbo engine, and you're going to miss out on some of that torque, especially on the low end. and you don't have to make that trade-off here.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. And versus a gasoline turbo, diesels don't have the same sort of overheating concerns generally because diesel engines burn diesel at a lower temperature. So the engine operates at a lower temperature than the gasoline engines, which is why so many people prefer to tow with diesels. I mean, there are a bunch of reasons. Obviously, we get the low-end torque, etc., which is fantastic for towing. But there is also that additional side benefit of the extra cooling effectively that you can get in a diesel engine. You know, one common complaint with diesels, though, especially small diesels in half-ton trucks, had been a lack of engine braking. But that's where this diesel engine is really interesting, because this is the only diesel in this modern crop of half-ton diesels. Well, it's the only one standing, but it was also the only one designed from the ground up to be a truck engine from the very beginning. And in our testing back at home, this is the only one that could keep a 10,000-pound trailer well-controlled going downhill just on engine braking alone. The others, you were really overheating the brakes on the way down.
Yeah, and again, if that's something you do on a regular basis, first of all, these are things you already know. But if it's something you're considering or curious about, or this is what you want to get as your toy hauler, your trailer with your quad, with your camping gear, whatever it is, if you do have that as potential routes, it's worth noting that it's going to be a lot easier on your truck, lower your maintenance costs a little bit, and you're going to be a lot more under control.
Yeah, it's something that I've really noticed shoppers of previous generation V8 American trucks especially have noticed when they go and buy a new truck, and they've either opted for Ram's Eco Diesel or the Ford Diesel when it was available in the F-150 and in the Ram, or the twin turbo V6s that we find in the F-150 lineup. They're fantastic engines if you're driving in a straight line like we are here, honestly, or if you're in an area that's not terribly mountainous. But, you know, if you're in my situation where I'm going up and over mountain passes, if you live in Colorado, going up the Continental Divide, Sierra Nevada mountains, any of those larger mountain ranges in the US, and you're spending, say, 10, 20 miles going downhill, you are really going to notice the difference in control, brake applications, brake overheating, not just on your vehicle, but also on the trailer itself. And that's something that I think a lot of people don't really realize is you can go down those hills, obviously, in 3.5 liter V6 F-150, but you're not just going to be overheating the brakes on the car, which are nice, big, meaty, ventilated discs. You're also going to be overheating the drum brakes on your trailer, which are not going to be cooling as well. And, you can get yourself in a, kind of a questionable situation, let's just say, by the time you get to the bottom.
Yeah, it's not something I think we could chalk up as a full-on safety feature. However, there are going to be scenarios where this is going to not just add to the reliability, but also the general ability to safely tow a load.
For sure, and I have to say this 3-liter inline-six diesel is still my favorite engine in the GMC Sierra and the Silverado 1500. If you are getting either of these vehicles or any of GM's full-size SUVs, I really think this 3-liter diesel is the one to get. Whether it's standard, just stop here, or whether it's optional, go ahead and step up and get the optional diesel, especially if you're doing off-roading, towing, hauling, etc. on a regular basis. It's not going to be as fast as the V8, it's not going to be quite as much fun maybe as the 6.2, but I think this is a really solid choice. If you're looking to get your hands on the AT4 or the AT4X, these should be on dealer lots right around the time that you're watching this video, but be prepared to pay a bit more for 2024 than you would have for the 2023. The AT4 starts at $66,100, adding the X bumps that up to $79,200. That's a pretty healthy jump. The AT4 is already pretty capable. It has the diesel engine standard, and again, this is the refresh diesel, certainly an option to choose this over the 2023. We get the 2-inch lift standard, and we get the 2-speed transfer case with the rear locker. If you want the front locker though, you're going to need the AT4X. That's also going to bring along with it the AEV bumper, the AEV skid plates, and the DSSV dampers, which are going to make a pretty big difference if you're spending hours on a rough off-road course. Or if you live on a ranch and you're just going to spend hours driving around your big ranch somewhere, you're going to want these dampers. They're going to hold up under that heat and the extra stress an awful lot better. But keep in mind, the AT4X is going to cost a pretty penny. Now, if you want to take this to the ultimate, then you want the 2024 GMC Sierra 1500 AT4X AEV edition, which is quite a mouthful, and it's a little pricey. because adding that option to your AT4X is going to set you back an extra $6,895, but that's the way you get the AEV rear bumper, which we don't find on this particular model. You'll also get yet more skid plates, and you'll get the rocker guards that we find aftermarket on this one. We also have some unique wheels on that AEV edition truck also. That puts a theoretically fully loaded AT4X well over the $80,000 mark, and definitely in a different category than, I would say, its closest direct competitor at the moment, which would be something like the Toyota Tacoma TRD Pro. That's going to be $72,130 starting, 437 horsepower, lots of torque thanks to its standard hybrid system, but it's a very different kind of vehicle to this because of the way that it drives. I certainly prefer this out on an off-road course versus the hybrid Tundra, and the hybrid Tundra has, somewhat disappointing fuel economy. Aside from that, logically, cost-wise, you could compare this to a Raptor, possibly a Raptor R, but it's not the same kind of off-road vehicle. If you want to tow, if you want to haul, if you want to do more rock climbing kind of off-roading, I would probably get this over the Raptor R. If you want to blast at 100 miles an hour on a sand dune somewhere, then the Ford Raptor makes an awful lot of sense. It's definitely targeted for that kind of off-roading rather than this, but everything about the Raptor is going to be next level crazy. It's going to be harder to park because it's much wider. It's also going to be more expensive to insure, to repair, to maintain, etc. Everything is going to be more expensive on that model. If you want to spend less, you could get an F-150 Tremor, or you could get a Ram 1500 Rebel. They're all going to be less than this, but none of them are going to give you a diesel engine up front, and none of them are going to give you the front locker and some of the extra accessories that we have from AEV on this truck. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below, and stay tuned because hopefully I'll have one of these either with me, or Nick might have one up in the Pacific Northwest, or who knows, Travis might even have one up there in his neck of the woods as well. At that point in time, we can take a deeper dive into it and how it compares with the competition, really line up the price tags, etc. But I think it's easy to say this is one of my favorite half-ton trucks, period. I love the interior. I think it has the best interior in the segment. I also think this diesel engine is the best diesel engine in the half-ton segment, period, at least for the moment, until we maybe see something like a Hurricane twin-turbo inline-six available in the next generation Ram 1500. Until then, hit that subscribe button. Find us over at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of those social places, and we'll see all of you next week. If you thought I was done talking, you're almost right, because I should give a quick plug, a quick shout out to our other videos coming up. You may have either seen the video on the Canyon AT4X, the HD AT4X, or the 1500 AT4X, or the entire pack of AT4Xs, as I might say. But if you haven't, be sure and check out our videos on the 2024 1500 AT4X with the new turbo. Of course, the first ever AT4X heavy duty over here if you want off-road capability and stout towing and hauling, or if you want something that's more affordable, easier to park, and honestly more nimble on trails, then you want to take a look at the Canyon AT4X. And with that out of the way, again, hit that subscribe button. Find us over on social media, Twitter, Facebook, X, Post, News, all those things that you're supposed to be following, and I will see all of you next week.